Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast with Professor Albert Cheng. Dr. Cheng is an assistant professor at the Department of Education at the University of Arkansas, where he teaches courses in education policy and philosophy. He is the director of the Classical Education Research Lab, where he conducts research on the effects of classical education on character formation. He's a senior fellow at Cardis and an affiliated research fellow at the Program on Education Policy and Governance at Harvard University. Dr. Cheng serves on the governing board of Anthem Classical Academy and on the editorial board of the International Journal of Christianity and Education. Taught high school math at James Logan High School in Union City, California, after completing undergraduate in pure mathematics at University of California, Berkeley. Later returned to school, got his master's at Biola, and then went on to a PhD at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Cheng, thanks so much for sharing time. This is academic year for you in this time of year. Where are you at right now in the academic year? Is everything winding down, or are you like right in the middle of all of the last bit of the year?
Yeah, Zach. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here. But to that question, you've actually asked me on the back end of the semester. So actually, last Saturday, I just hooded a few of our freshly minted PhD students, or graduates now, really. So they're off and running, doing good things in this world.
Yeah, I love it. How did you end up? You chose University of Arkansas for your PhD program and then ended up there. What do you love about it? And having just freshly sent off some new ones, why University of Arkansas?
Yeah, look, I mean, I might be biased here, but I think we have the best education policy program in the US. And I think one of our strengths is that, well, one, we really preserve the usual norms, or what the norms of higher education should be. So that's open discourse and academic freedom. And so you're really welcome here to study any topic in education policy. And all of us, we're one reform-minded. I mean, we joke that at some point we hope that we'll stop being reform-minded because we'll end up where we want to be. But until then, we're pretty reform-minded in terms of thinking about how we might improve education policy and practice. But also, I think one of our distinctives is that we do a lot of quantitative, evidence-based research, and so a lot of the research that we do is data informed, and although that's not the only way to figure out what's real and what's true in this world, it's a powerful tool, which particularly in the field of education, where a lot is steered and a lot of decisions are made based on ideology. Some evidence to kind of speak to the validity of what we think is true really goes a long way to helping us figure out, well, what should we do with education? Those are just some of the distinctives, and I think those are the big attractions to the program that we have here.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's encouraging, especially in the current climate, for so many of us
Yeah.
looking at universities and saying, are those ideals, those aspirational things of a community where you really can ask open questions, have dialogue, wrestle over big ideas, is that really true anymore? Is it happening, especially at a big school, University of Arkansas?
Hmm.
So it's encouraging. And when I came across your work, I was telling you, it was through a lecture at the Heritage Foundation. You were on a panel with Kyle Washut, who's been on our program before, and a really wonderful dialogue about the approach to education. And I was struck by your remarks, kind of pulled on a thread, saw some papers you had written, some remarks you had made, and I kept just being pulled further and further. And then you quoted Malcolm Guite, who's a favorite poet of ours, and I was like, okay, I love this guy, and I can't wait to sit and have a conversation about education. And really, for us, it's we talk about uncovering an enchanted world, the reality
Hmm.
that life is permeated with significance and spiritual meaning, and that's the the Geit quote that you kind of
Hmm.
pointed to. So we'll circle back to that. But before we do, I wonder if you can talk. We just talked classical education K-8 with a leader of a school here in Florida.
Hmm.
But I'm curious for you, what's the work that you're doing at the Classical Education Research Lab? You're doing that paralleling your work at the
Hmm.
university, or is it nested within the University of Arkansas?
Yeah, no, it's nested, and so this is a research lab that's housed that I direct, and it's housed in the Department of Education Reform there. And so again, it's putting our strengths, our what we're good at, discipline wise, to speak to that, the movement that's going on. I kind of came to this. One, it's always been my own bias and priors. I think classical education, I think they've got a lot of things right. And as I got more and more into it, um, perhaps it's not surprising that a movement that maybe is dominated by folks that have a humanities background, not much social science research into it, and in fact, I mean, I'd say, rightly so, that folks have a healthy dose of skepticism to what our, the modern empirical project can contribute. So, given all that, it wasn't surprising to find that, hey, actually, I was speaking about evidence-based policy before, evidence-based decision making, and so I thought, hey, look, let me put my gifts into this. There's a lack of just an empirical look and testing of some of the theory and philosophy that classical education has articulated. Let's test these. Let's put these to an empirical test, see what we can learn. And the whole intent isn't simply to play gotcha. I'm not some Francis Bacon type, just undermine anybody's traditions or anything. As I said, I have to confess my priors. I think I find the classical, classical education, that approach very persuasive. Want that for my own kids, actually. But to bring empirical evidence to bear, I think there's a lot to learn. There might be things we thought were true that weren't exact, aren't really lining up. And so I think there's stuff for practitioners. If you're a classical educator or leader, school leader, listen to this. Let's not be afraid to test what we think is true and revise our views if necessary. But also let's see what the data say. And in fact, it's at least with some of the work that I'm doing, it's doing is reinforcing some of the theories and philosophy that we've been articulating for quite a while.
Yeah, I love that approach and just the way that you're thinking about evidence-based research and data we need to keep it nested within an overall picture. And I think Ian McGilchrist's work in The Master and His Emissary and the beauty and good and true of reality, that is an overarching and governing picture of what is real, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the data and the evidence
Yeah,
conversation, and we can't have a conversation between the two. And I think keeping those two married is actually the healthy way forward, so that we don't just go, well, I want my kids to live outside and read poetry and the great books, and I don't really know why, it's just my
yeah,
intuition. I think there's a better case to be made for how humans are designed. And when we
yeah,
participate
yeah,
with design and education and aim rightly, really beautiful things happen for human flourishing, for
yeah,
character and
yeah.
moral formation. And all of that leads to our life together and civic life, economic life, all of those things. So without your work, I don't think we can make a robust case. And so it's deeply important. You're a practitioner too, just in your spare time. You're on the board at Anthem.
Hmm. Hmm.
Tell us, that's in Fayetteville as well. Is that a K-8 school, K-12 school? And did you choose to sit on the board just out of passion for classical education? Or again, is that a part of saying, I want theory and practice, I want to be closer to the actual school community?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good question. Happy to tell that story. Yeah, so I sit on the board of Anthem Classical Academy. We just finished our third year, so it's actually a new school. Our oldest students are about to be eighth graders this coming fall, and from the beginning, the plan has been to be a K-12 school. And so we're getting there, and we're growing, adding, actually this past school year, we just added a second kindergarten section. And so, now I mean, if you're out there trying to figure out how to start a new school or grow a school, it's that model of, look, get your initial families in, and then at some point you're going to be able to build one kindergarten and those kids age up. And at some point you expand that. And so we're getting that base of two classes. So we're going to have two first grade classes this coming year, and hopefully the year after that, two second grade, while keeping two in the earlier grade. So it's exciting. And really how I got involved with Anthem, I mean, you could call it serendipity, if you will, or providence. Yeah, it's actually some. I mean, we don't have time to get into the nitty gritty of the details of that story, but just met folks accidentally, so to speak, and one thing led to another, and eventually met the folks that were trying to found the school, and they heard about what I was doing, and uh, asked me to serve on the board. And I said, actually, you know what? You guys are trying to build something special. Let me put some investment behind this, and it's been great. It's been such a experience that's stretched me. Never had to do anything like this before, but I'm glad I did it, and lots of hard things. But we're about to enter our fourth year, and we're flying.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. I mean, just the dialogue that we're having. We just had a conversation with a headmaster here in Florida, young classical school. They've got a few years on you, but still a small school. And it was so encouraging to hear that it's really a pioneering movement that is
Yeah,
drawing people together, saying, okay, we know that there's something insufficient. We know there's an opportunity, and we're just trying to get the right people on the right seats, aimed in the right direction, and give it a go. And it's cool to hear that, we always imagine, well, schools are funded because they have giant money and a big donor, and then somebody builds a building. And that's actually not how it works. It's serendipity
no,
and
yeah,
providence. And a few people get together and say, we should give it a shot. And you have one a kindergarten classroom, you add one. That's actually how it happens. And that's awesome. We should
yeah,
celebrate that. Yeah, that's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
it's a great way to segue into Geit, and because I think the remarks that I read where
yeah.
you quoted Geit were actually for Anthem, and I was at first, just because
Mhm.
I'm paying attention, I was reading and I thought, okay, you started with citing, I think it was Philippians, then you went to Geit, so you've got scripture and you've got poetry and you've got the classics, and you end with Plato, and I thought, what a fantastic example of young kids having somebody who has pursued academic excellence all the way to the level you have, coming right back down and saying, this isn't an abstraction. I'm going right back to a young, small startup school and contributing what I consider like the best. It was like watching somebody take batting practice. Every line of those remarks,
Yeah.
I was like, good, this is exactly what the world needs. And you got to Geit, and you said that he has this view of the world as pregnant with significance and meaning.
Mm. Yeah,
When what do you hear him saying? What do you hear
yeah,
Geit saying from his poetic voice? The world's pregnant with significance and meaning. Let's start
yeah,
there, and then we'll kind
yeah,
of move into K-12 and university life. What that means.
yeah. All right. Well, I'll fire some opening salvos here, because I mean we could talk about this for forever. I think. Uh, Look, I think one way to maybe think about this is to recognize, what's a conventional way of viewing the world today. So a typical way we view the world today is that actually everything is just material. It's just a bunch of matter. There's elements from the periodic table and atoms, and they're just bouncing around. And there's certain physical laws, mechanical laws, physics, right? Those essentially kind of govern what we see in this world, how it all works. And but beyond that, really, there's no meaning behind the world, behind reality. And in that case, what that means by implication is that humans, um, the world is our sandbox to play in, and we could do whatever we want with it, and we could. I think C.S. Lewis calls it mastering nature, right? That this idea that the natural world is out there for us to master, to kind of bend to our will. And I think that now, of course, again, that assumes that the world and reality has no inherent meaning or purpose. And I think what Guide's getting at is the opposite. That this is a view that actually challenges a lot of that conventional thinking. That actually the world is filled with meaning. It isn't. We can't do whatever we want to it. There we can kind of master nature to some extent, but the level of mastery isn't uh, you know uh, you don't want to go too far and think like I can do whatever I want with it, where I'm at the center, right? Like the world revolves around me and it's my will. That actually there's something that's outside of ourselves. There's things we have to submit to. Uh, there are things, there's a proper order to things around us. And so our job to truly flourish um, requires us to recognize and discern what that order is, what reality is, and in some sense, submit to it.
Mm.
Right. And, the language of submission is, I mean, people hate that today, right? Like we always think, no, I want to be master, right? But really, if the world is filled with meaning, if there are constraints on what we can do, if things have natures that can't be changed, that has deep implications for how we ought to live and what we ought to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll start there, and we can pick up where on anything there.
No, I love how you frame that, and even that description of mastery. Yeah, I think this is what's so important for, and what we intuitively know, all of us who are in this conversation, our listening audience, are starting to recognize the deep downstream implication and tragedy of really divorcing from a meaningful, permeated with significance and spiritual meaning vision of reality, that there is an ultimate reality, and that ultimate reality is not man at the center. It is an ultimate reality that is beyond, transcendent, good, beautiful, true, all these ways that the world is thought about this. And if you divorce from that, you really get will to power. And it is
Yeah.
mastery over a material world, which we can kind of pretend that, well, you can do that in a loving way. But at the end of the day, the really, truly philosophical end of that thinking is it is power governing the world, not love.
Right.
And then you build an education policy based on that. And I think that's where I want to
Right.
ask you as an expert in this, is that essentially the modern Western vision of education policy? Does it really flow from that upstream current, or reservoir of will to power? Have we really built an education system really undergirded by that philosophy? Is that what we've constructed in the West, and then that's crumbling? Is that what's happening, what we all feel?
Yeah, I'd say that I think that's true. That'd be my position on it. Now I'll put in the caveat that just because here in the United States, um, schools aren't centrally managed, and so you're going to get a lot of variation in the extent to which different schools push that vision. But that being said, these assumptions about reality and will to power that characterize modernity, we're all drinking from that well. And so we're doing things that are consistent with that are aligned with that we might not even be aware of. So I'll give you an example. So uh, one of the mantras that's characterized education for the past 15, 20, 25 years is being college and career ready, right? And so education is about preparation for college and the workforce. Well, if you keep digging and poking at that, you quickly get to uh, this foundation that is exactly what we're talking about on which a lot of modernity rests, right? So, what I mean, for instance, consider why if a kid asks you, why should I go to college? Right? The narrative we tell them is, look, you go to college, it's a great investment. You can get any job you want. It's your opportunity to go anywhere. You could move out of your hometown, make a lot of money, and with that money, you can do whatever you want. It'll make, you can join any social circle you want. You can do leisure however you want, pursue your passions, and be economically viable. Right? All that language is this language of self, and ultimately it's pointing to a self that's understood as what I'll call the autonomous self. Right? The end there is freedom understood as autonomy. I have money. I have social connections and credit. I have a degree, right? And I can do whatever I want with it. The world is now mine to master, just to use some of the language we've been invoking here. Right. And so that's the narrative we tell kids, kind of convey, right? Why go to college? That's kind of baked into our thinking about college. Now, whether we explicitly say it all the time, I mean, that's a different story, but that's there, right? And a lot of that is, I mean, just to contrast that a little bit with perhaps a pre-modern vision of education. Freedom is not supposed to be you get to do whatever you want, right? Freedom, as we were talking about, is actually conformity to the order that's actually out there. Right? The true, the good, and the beautiful aren't whatever you want them to be. They're fixed. They have natures, and true freedom is kind of living in conformity with what that is. That doesn't sit well with modern ears, and certainly, if you press, I think a lot of educators and folks in higher ed that are training our teachers about the purpose of education. It's not about conformity to what's true, what's good, what's beautiful, right? It's about we want kids to realize their full potential. We want kids to live their authentic self. It's that kind of language, and we're drawing from that, I think, to a great extent, which is I think why classical education seems quite distinctive and almost foreign to most folks, because it really causes them people butt heads with the underlying presuppositions that are there.
Yeah. It's so helpful to have you just carefully kind of unveil or pull back the curtain a little bit about the framework that and the significance of having that framework. That's really the modern framework about power, about freedom, and then the language that gets attached to that scaffolding. And I think not out of malicious intent, but kind of unconsciously we're culpable in repeating this narrative that's really a very young narrative. Most of world history has not been governed by this narrative. Just this little data point of modernity that's really had this us at the center exclusively perspective. And I think what we're seeing in anxiety, suicide, disenchantment, we're seeing in our view, if you have you can have disenchanted churches. You can have churches who are supposed to be engaging in this ultimate reality, transcendent relationship where we're the receiver and not the center. But that's even been eroded. But if you erode that from every institution, government, art, finance, religion, and now education for our conversation, you wonder, well, why does it feel the way it feels in the Western world? And we go, something's wrong. And you go, well, yes, there's something wrong. But in some ways, we're getting exactly what we've designed and built. Like our education, if we're trying to build a total work culture, and if the aim of education is to get you work ready so that you can earn, and you're earning ready so that you can participate in commerce, if that's the point, well, we're kind of doing that.
Right, right.
But we're sad because we're doing
Yeah.
that. Help us then understand like the starting point. You guys have kindergarten kids at Anthem, and the classical education approach says, no, there is an ultimate reality. And the goal of it, if that's the case, then what is the goal of education fundamentally? If there's a distinction between we're going to get you college ready, work ready, economy ready, classical education says we want to get you ready for something else. What is that something else?
Yeah. So let me kind of put it in. Actually, I think what's real helpful, not to brag about Anthem Classical Academy, but I really like our mission statement because I think it conveys exactly the alternative, what we're about. So really, we say that Anthem Classical Academy exists to cultivate. It's a classical Christian school. So Classical Academy exists to cultivate Christ-centered leaders who know truth, practice goodness, and recognize beauty. Okay, so there's that anchoring in what reality, the cosmos really is. Okay, now the question is then, what do we do with that? The second half of our mission statement is, we will pursue excellence in character, in scholarship, and service out of reverence for God and His glory. Okay, and so I think what you catch there is there is this pursuit of excellence, virtue, if you will, right? Being good, and I know you guys don't have the mission statement right in front of you, so I'll repeat parts of it, but right, we're pursuing excellence in character, so it's moral goodness, right? How should we be as people? And since we're a learning institution, we also emphasize learning and excellence in our scholarship. And then also service, right? This idea that it's not just about you. Your ultimate end is actually to love, right? It's rooted in love, and perhaps Jesus Christ is the ultimate example there, right? Of laying His own life down. So it's not about you, right? It's about you laying your life down for others. And then all of this is rooted in reverence. Actually, you might even use the word enchantment, right? Reverence for God and His glory. And I think that captures the flavor of the kinds of graduates we want to see, right? It's moral excellence. They're being equipped to be in the workforce, right? They're getting the requisite skills to do all the kinds of things that mainstream education is doing. We see how it's rooted in something transcendent, right? You're talking about disenchanted churches, right? Like, our vision at Anthem is fully about being enchanted, right? Being having excellent character, right? So you're kind of discerning moral reality. We want our graduates to have reverence for God and His glory. Right? A lot of this language is taking you out of the self and actually lifting your vision higher to something. And I think this all sits with really what the ultimate purpose of being human is. Right? We weren't made just to be our own gods, really. We're made for something greater outside of ourselves.
Yeah. This is why, Professor Cheng, I was excited to have you on the show, to have the conversation, because we're going to learn a lot from you, and this is just good for us, but also to point to your work and say, I really believe this in Western civilization. If we could get 100 people together and say, we need 100 voices like Professor Cheng in the world saying, in my institution, I've pursued excellence in education. I'll be the voice here. And you get somebody else who's doing that in government, somebody else who's doing that in the church, somebody else who's doing that in the arts. That's what it's going to take. And again, just like back to starting Anthem, there's not some other magic superhuman that's going to do this, though it really is resting on a few of us listening to a podcast here, a podcast there, saying, okay, I'm not alone. And there's people like Professor Cheng leading this work so we can follow along. And so I'm going to pull on to the practical of how we do that. But thank you for your work. That's a long, windy way of saying thank you, because in our moment, if there's a turn that's to be made, it's not going to be made again from some outside in. It's going to be a recovery project to say, hey, this is not the way the world has always thought. And what does it mean to be human? And to have the rigor, to have a PhD from the University of Arkansas to say, hey, listen, I can sit at the table and discuss what it is to be human. And really, at the highest level, we can debate and discuss, is it an accidental, mechanical, purely material view? Or is it possible that we were made for something beyond us? And if so, then we're in relationship with that greater thing. And then, and you start to construct a different way of being human. I think that's your hope for graduates. That's our hope for the whole culture, that it takes this turn.
Yeah.
And we're going to inch toward it. But I'm sitting here thinking about moms and dads listening to this conversation going, okay, thank you for helping create like a framework and a structure. I hear Lewis's Christian humanism coming through, that even our statement of the vision is Jesus. It's not just like something nice to put on the refrigerator, but that's what it looks like to be a human. That there is a visible incarnational picture to say we can aim at that, and education and formation should be toward that. And I talk to people in finance, government, every discipline. And what I hear consistently is I can teach somebody how to do their job. What is very difficult is to have the moral formation that I can trust them to do their job and to do it well with the spirit of our company or our spirit that they have signed on with. That's a different task. And I hear you aiming at that. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I'm mom or dad, and let's just talk K-8. I'm in San Diego or Seattle, and there isn't an anthem. I don't know where to start. I want to make some steps towards this recovery for my own kids and family. What should parents look for as they look at schools? Like, how do you encourage and say, what would you say to parents as they go into a city and say, okay, I'm about to put my kids in kindergarten, first, second, third grade? What questions would you be asking as you look at schools to help us navigate? Because easy would be, if you're in Fayetteville, call Anthem. If you're not, what do we do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the answer is gonna vary depending where you are, just because, as you say, right, different places throughout the country are different cities and locations throughout the country are in different places really when it comes to this. And so, I think my most general advice is to, well, get to know what's out there. I think that's first. You might be surprised to learn what's there. I'll rope in my sister and brother-in-law. They live out in California, and they actually found a classical Christian school. A 5-minute walk from where they chose to live. And so you might be surprised. And I got a 7-year-old niece there that's going there now. So you might be surprised at what's out there. So look around, but also be open-minded in terms of what option you ultimately choose. I know maybe might be a tendency to say, oh, I have no choice but to homeschool classically. And look, I mean, for some parents, maybe you have to do that. Maybe you have to do that hard work. For other parents that for where that option is not feasible, maybe there actually is a private school that gets close to that vision. Maybe it doesn't even have to be exactly classical. In fact, a lot of faith-based private schools, they don't have classical in their name, but they're pretty close. And even secular private schools, you never know. I mean, look, we've been referencing Plato and some of these great philosophers. The the undercurrent, right, of what we're talking about, like that pre-modern tradition, it's there. Charter schools, right? These aren't private schools; they're publicly funded, but and there's lots of charter school networks throughout most states, and of course it varies from state to state. But I think of lots Great Hearts or um, Founders Academy. I mean, these are networks that are in multiple states operating charter schools, so, public schools, but they use a classical approach, right? And so, yeah, my best advice is get to know what's out there, and then the second thing is um, you get to know folks. You're going to be surprised at how many like-minded people there are. It's actually going to be like the C.S. Lewis Four Loves. I think Aristotle talks about friendship is about people standing. Well, Lewis says it's people standing shoulder to shoulder, and then they're looking at a common thing. And the remark of, "Oh, you too, you like this too," right? I think that experience is probably more common than we think. And I'll even tell you that Anthem Classical Academy. I mean, you can Google this, find our website and the founding story. It's three or four different families that didn't know each other, and actually they even kind of came together. One moved to Fayetteville, a couple were already there. It was one of them was a current head of school who was working in Fayetteville Public Schools. All of three of them, these families, independently wanted a classical Christian education. They didn't know each other at all before they somehow kind of connected, and they said, let's build this school, right? And so um, it is a lot of this kind of organic, hard work, and so yeah, be open-minded about that. I mean, I know that's not a great answer. I know we like to have like something that's already there, but it's exciting to play a role in building something, not just for your own kids, but for generations to come. So I don't know. I know that's not maybe the easiest answer to swallow because it's a lot of work and the solution isn't readily available, but you never know what you might build. That's not only gonna bless you, but bless others.
Yeah. And what those conversations will start. I appreciate that kind of open invitation to say, hey, let's be curious, let's be open. And at first, and I'll just add to that voice, be empowered to ask a good question. What's your vision of a human person, right? If you've got a public school there and you've got a principal who's just ask these questions. I remember reading a great book called Protecting the Gift, written by a guy named Gavin DeBecker, who is a California guy. And it was about like taking care and keeping our kids safe. And I remember he wrote in there that, none of us think to ask the person that we're going to have watching our children if they've ever been accused or arrested for a crime against children. And he said, we would just never ask that question because it's socially impolite. And he said, and yet we give our kids to people who we've never met, and we don't ask the most obvious thing. So I would say, I just want to empower us. The world has not always default assumed that we are at the center of a material only world. That's a pretty fresh view. And so as a parent, be empowered to ask questions, be curious, go to your school and say, what does it mean to be human? Why do we educate? What's the purpose of education? What's our portrait of a graduate? And you might be surprised what you learn. You may find a public school who's got a beautiful vision and they've wrestled through those ideas. So I love that. And I think it's a natural segue into some of your work on reform and policy. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you, as these conversations start to bubble up, I think there's more ballot initiatives. There's more conversations about, do we allow for school choice? How do we steward our dollars? There's a lot of concern that says, well, we're going to disadvantage people if we take money from public schools. Like, just give us a little coaching as we head into the summer and then make the corner to a political season. How do we think well about what's actually important at a policy level? And again, from parents, from people who are voting people, are there certain things that data is saying, hey, these things do create an environment for great schools to pop up, right? The things that we
Yep.
can do from
Yep.
a public side, just give us a little bit of feedback on that so that we can think well about the policy side as it relates to us.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, so by the way, I think that's also something to think about. Just in response to your previous questions, if you're a parent out there, get to know your state, get to know, see if there's actually a school choice program, because we've been having in recent years just legislatures across many states start new programs. I mean, most recent ones are called education savings accounts, and so essentially families can get funding from their state governments. Sometimes it's funded through private donations, actually charitable organizations. They can get funding that they can use to help cover the costs of private school tuition, um, uh, or even for at least for education savings accounts, you can actually use that funding to help purchase qualified educational expenses. So things like tutoring or curriculum. Actually, in some states, you can even pay for certain kinds of therapies because there's some kind of educational justification for it. So yeah, get to know those kinds of programs. But I think the main story there is that these programs are being established in lots of states now. In Arkansas, we actually have one, a new education savings accounts program. I think it's like in year two, if I'm counting correctly. It's tough to remember because there's so many that are coming up. Get to know these programs, and look, if you're in a state that has them, get to know how to avail yourselves of that opportunity, or even even if you don't have school children, kind of become the kind of expert in your community and help parents in your community, right? We ought to take care of other people's children as well. Now, if you're in a state that doesn't have these kinds of programs, um, I mean, there's a certain fair amount of political and civic engagement that you can participate in. Let your state rep know that, hey, you'd like to have this kind of program. Right now there aren't referenda, to my knowledge, for school choice programs, and so it's not about kind of going to the ballot box and saying, yes, I want the program. A lot of it is now being passed in state legislatures. And so it's about, finding state representatives that will advocate for these kinds of programs. And so, get engaged civically in doing that. Or there are advocacy groups throughout the states as well. Get connected with them. And you're on good grounds to do this. I mean, the best research out there shows that school choice programs improve educational outcomes for kids. We don't measure everything. We're kind of unable to measure everything, but when it comes to improving academic achievement, school choice programs have been demonstrated to do that. They also improve educational attainment, so you become more likely to graduate from high school or finish college. And I think that underscores both the academic impact, but also the character impact, right? Because finishing school I mean, it takes academic knowledge to do that. So you got to be do well and be numerate and literate, but it's also the content of your character that helps you finish. You do what you need to attain these goals. Right? You're not floundering when you're facing adversity. And so the best evidence out there suggests that school choice does improve these kinds of outcomes that we care about. And you mentioned this idea that it takes funding away from other schools. Well, again, there's another whole line of research that demonstrates that traditional public schools actually improve in the presence of school choice.
Mm.
And I think a lot of that is due to, hey, they actually can't take it for granted that parents can just kind of leave and go to a better school or a different school if they want to. But also just it's also pushing public schools to kind of rethink, oh, actually, here's this other school that's delivering this, and parents seem to want it. Is there a way that we can kind of start delivering that? And so, all in all, I mean, the evidence base and the research basis for the efficacy of school choice programs is positive. So, yeah, you're standing on good grounds to try to advocate for more of it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I think some of the concern from our audience is, if you're imagining this picture of shalom, universal
Mm,
flourishing and delight, like it's not just my good, it's my neighbor's good. And I want to think
yeah.
well about both. I think there is some hesitancy even in the school choice because the narrative that we've heard over and over again, which I'm hearing you say the data doesn't support this, but some of what we've just kind of assumed is, well, if we create that, then good parents, good kids, good funding,
Hmm.
parents who want to contribute in the life and the education of their kids, we're just going to evacuate all these other areas, and there'll be a blighted,
Hmm.
disempowering defunding of schools that really then kids are trapped in those. And
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
real concern. I think people have a heart to say, I don't want that to take place. And I want to believe, that market economy is going to raise everybody up. And yet I'm suspicious of that because I've seen it economically not work out in that modeling. So
Mm.
before we move on from it, I hear you saying data wise, it does show the data is there to say that school choice actually is a good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And let me add just a little bit to that. The personally, like, so, I think school choice does, I mean, if you want to kind of use the kind of free market theory to explain what school choice does, I think I think that's true. I think that's valid. But for me, there's actually another way to think about school choice, which is it opens up the possibility to create something, to create alternatives, alternatives that will be the standard bearer for what excellence in education is. And uh, I to build new schools, right, that contribute to the common good. I mean, you mentioned, early in my introduction, you said I was an affiliated fellow with Cardis. It's a faith-based think tank out in Canada, but they do education policy work all across North America. And the way they describe it is that we ought to think about every school as public, because every school in some way contributes to the public good or the common good. And so school choice provides an opportunity to do that. And this idea of abandoning traditional public schools, just because you have school choice doesn't mean you do that. I mean, those two don't have to be linked to one another. You can actually be pro every educational sector, pro educational pluralism, really. And really, so it's about all of us kind of discerning, where are our giftings, where can we invest in? And for many of us, it will be investing in your local district-run public school. You can't abandon that. For others, it'll be investing in the work of building other kinds of schools. And mind you, right, those schools, many of them do have that missional posture to them. I know at Anthem, we believe that, look, classical Christian education is the best education. We don't want finances to be a barrier to that. And so, we fundraise a ton to get scholarships. We participate in the Education Savings Accounts program because we don't want a school that's only accessible to those who can afford it. It's an excellent education that everyone should have, is our conviction. So yeah, you can definitely work to pursue the common good here.
Yeah. I love that how you describe it almost in a research lab. If you think about the invention or innovation in medicine or something like that, that
Hmm.
creating the
Hmm.
opportunity to try stuff will lead to new stuff that we haven't even in new approaches that have continuity with things that have always been there. So I love it. That's why I love the work you're doing. I know we're out of time, and my producer's looking at me, and you committed a certain amount, so I want to be gracious. I'm going to slip a last question in, just because I know
Sure.
there's parents. I'm one of them sitting here going, "Okay, you went to Berkeley. You are on staff at University of Arkansas, big state school. If you had college kids or a kid who is heading out to college, we see what's happening on Columbia, we see what's happening at
Mm.
different universities, and we go, okay, we are where we are, and we do want human flourishing, character formation, moral formation, and we do want our kids to get good jobs. If you were coaching a parent who says, hey, I don't know if I should be aiming at a big state school, again, do you have one or two questions that you would say, hey, I want to ask these questions? And I hear you
Yeah.
saying, be open. Don't just think you have to go to Notre Dame or you have to go to a particular school. So be open, be curious. But as you're doing college visits, what would you say are a couple good questions that a parent can think about that might lead them to say, hey, Berkeley might be the right place for my kid?
Yeah, yeah. Man, that's a heck of a last question to voice there. Hopefully I deliver. You know, yeah. I mean, my kids aren't even near that stage, so I haven't wrestled with that as a parent. But you know, I guess I'll just say that one of the conversations that my wife and I have is it's about discerning what their vocation's going to be. And in some sense, for the listeners out there that are people of faith, it's about discerning that and being wise about that, and ultimately it is trusting God with your kids. And so, maybe your kid might be called to go to a Columbia where a lot of stuff is going on, and to be prepared for that. You never know. But perhaps, I guess to answer your question directly, what is the one question? I think it's, uh, yeah, what is the vocation that your kid's going to be called to as best as you can discern? Um, and what would be wise? And what are the limits of what I can do and have control over, and what do I then need to kind of entrust um, to uh, to Providence? So anyway, I hope that's a little bit helpful for some
Hey,
parents, but
I
it is a tough question.
I think it's a brilliant answer to say, and I think it tees us up for some future conversations around how do I discern that calling? Because it presupposes a caller. So we're talking about
Yeah,
an
yeah,
enchanted world, a world where there is a meaningful, significant backdrop where our kids are called. They're made and designed and given gifts. And how do we discern that calling? And then how do we find institutions that are going to see them as people who are created and called and then nurture those? So Professor
yeah.
Cheng, you're doing that within the University of Arkansas. You're doing that to help create a movement for other schools. So we're in your debt. Your work is super, super important and meaningful in our moment, and we're just really grateful for the time. So thank you so much.
Hey, you're very welcome. It's great to be here.